So the central banks aim at this Orwellian dystopia of total control, and the central bank digital currency will enable them to monitor all your transactions and switch you off, and switch your power to purchase anything off. And also, you'll be very selective. Maybe you'll be allowed to buy this, but not that. Oh, this is too far from your home. You can't buy there. Anything is possible with this digital control tool. Of course, there's a big hurdle now, because they never tell you how's that actually going to work in practice. The intermediate step is to have it on your mobile phone, but really the goal is to have it implanted under your skin. And there's a hurdle. This is a big, imposition and violation of human dignity. So there's resistance. And that's where universal basic income comes in, which is an old idea, a century old. Why are the elites that so far ignored this idea as being sort of somewhat communist, why are they now all endorsing it? All the billionaires are coming, oh, we need universal basic income. And then even in 2017, when the technology was there, the microchip technology, Bill Gates said, oh, it's too early to have universal basic income. Well, because digital IDs hadn't been introduced yet. And that's, of course, where the whole COVID story comes in. Now, thanks to COVID, the EU and others have adopted the COVID vaccination passport, certificates to be extended until 2023, they've recently decided. And it seems that the Swedes, which are always good for these social experiments, it seems, have increased the microchip implantation process because it's going to be unified with the vaccine passport, which of course is less the currency than a monitoring, surveying, and total control tool.
What I would like to ask is there a future for money? And to be more specific, if these people who desire this great reset with its centralized monetary power in the central banks and the digital currencies are successful, will money still be money? Will it still fit the definition of money that we're used to? Or will it be something completely different?
Yeah, exactly. I think the goal is to have this retail CBDC, which is not really money anymore, because you lose control over your purchasing power, your spending. It's subject to the decrees of the central planners, and when you fit in and you make the right decisions, that's okay, but anything outside their prescribed scope will not be possible. So it is not anymore money in the normal sense.
Just an instrument of power.
It is a control tool, and that's why we have to be against it. It seems that the resistance that some have put up, and I certainly have tried my best since, the last decade, to argue against that. Of course, when 7 years ago you talk about the introduction of a central bank digital currency in a microchip implant, of course you're called all sorts of names, but it's not the guys that have these ridiculous assumptions that are the conspiracy theorists. No, it's the ones that talk about what actually happens in reality. And so it seems that in response to that, just 2 months ago, there's been an indication that the central planners have decided, okay, we have to slow this down a bit. And it seems that in Europe, they've decided to first move with what's called a wholesale CBDC, which is the central bank digital currency is introduced only via the banking system, and therefore will not, at least at this stage, hurt the banks. But of course, it's the thin edge of a wedge, because they can quickly then, at some stage when they decide to switch to retail, from wholesale to retail CBDC, and then the banking system will be would be at risk immediately. So that's why it's better not to have the CBDC. I mean, it's a misnomer, and they try to make it sound new when we've been using digital bank currency for many decades. That's our bank transfers, and most of the money supply is bank digital currency, BDC. And they fail to explain that, and then they're selling their central bank current accounts and this CBDC as something new, when really it's about power, and they want to usurp that power, because they figured out now that more and more people realize banks create money. They could actually set up in their local community a bank which will support their community and lead to tremendous prosperity. And many people have done that. But they want to stop that. So now they're saying, oh, no, we can't have that. And this is one of the responses to introduce central bank digital currency. So we have to hold against it. But I think we also have to really work hard to create local banks from scratch.
And how do they want to build up their central bank digital currencies on COVID events?
Yes. So the idea had been by central banks to introduce this, as we said, central bank digital currency. But the one funny thing is that they'd never told us, and by now we've had lots of articles on CBDC, right? But have you ever seen an article or a video or, whatever description of what it actually looks like? I mean, with central bank paper money, we know what it looks like, right?
Yeah.
Bank digital currency, we know, and we've used it ourselves. We know what it looks like. But what does central bank digital currency look like? You see? So they never talk about that because people won't actually like the looks of it.
Yeah.
Because it apparently looks, and several central banks apparently, as I heard from my sources, have already fully developed the final stage of CBDC. I mean, it comes in stages, initially likely through your mobile phone,
yeah.
but that's only an intermediate step. Mm. And the final stage is, it's small, and it's the size of a grain of rice. Now, why is that?
And that grain of rice is your entire wallet, or?
Yes, it's your digital ID,
yeah.
Your wallet, can be your passport, your key. Now, of course, what we found with our debit cards or credit cards is they've already now moved to the system, RFID chips, RFID technology where you just wave the thing, contactless.
Yes,
that is sort of the conditioning us in this direction. That in the future you'll just wave your hand because you've got the microchip implant under your skin, and because and each step there's a rational reason. It's easier just to wave this, isn't it? It's much faster because we always have to wait in the queues as everyone types in their numbers and all that. So just wave it, it's quicker. But the next rationalization would be, but you can lose your card, somebody can steal your card, and then you're just waving. That's kind of risky. Wouldn't it be nice if you couldn't lose it and nobody could steal it? But it's clear that that's it is almost a step too far for a lot of people because it is a violation of human dignity to actually inject something like that under the skin. So that's where you need some more persuasion.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that this concept of universal basic income has been around for around a century, where everyone should get some kind of citizens, payment. But the billionaire elites have so far not liked that. But since 2015, they've all come out. I mean, all the big billionaires and World Economic Forum have come out, this is a good idea, universal basic income. Well, why suddenly now? Because now we have the technology for the microchip implant. And so in 2017, Bill Gates came out and said that universal basic income is a good idea, but it's too early to introduce it. Now, what was still missing? So we had the technology for the microchip implant, but what was missing was the digital ID hadn't been introduced. Now, this is where this whole COVID agenda had become very useful.
So they were really planning this maybe decades ago, and every couple of years they were sitting around a table and having fun with each other. And how do we implement this actually? What can we make up to make the people doing this what we want? And then they just do something.
Well, I mean, this is how it works in economics. You see, most people think economists they are like scientists, where you objectively analyze the data, then as you sort of assemble the data, you organize the data, you see certain patterns. Maybe this happens whenever that happens. So maybe there's a link, and then you test a hypothesis, and then you come to a conclusion. This would be scientific work. That's not how it works in economics.
Okay.
In economics, and I'm talking about mainstream economics, neoclassical economics, and so on. What you do there is you start with your conclusion. What do you want to prove? And of course, what they have been wanting to prove is that markets are efficient and optimal, and government intervention is inefficient, and therefore we should deregulate, liberalize, and privatize. That's the conclusion they've wanted to prove. And then you work backwards. Well, what sort of model will give us this conclusion? And then what sort of assumptions are needed to justify that model? And then present in reverse order. You present your assumptions for sake of argument. Let's assume X, Y, Z, and so on. Then we get this sort of setup. We manipulate it. Oh, surprise, surprise. Here we can show that government intervention is bad and markets should be left on their own. There should be no restrictions on big business. There should be deregulation, liberalization, and we should privatize any national assets.
Which are, so the things are going on for decades.
So you start with your conclusion, you work backwards, you present it the other way around. And that's been going on for decades in economics. So it stands to reason that, particularly when you're in the business of central planning, you start with your goals. I mean, what do you want to achieve? And then you work backwards, how do we get there? And then what is needed for that? I mean, that is the function of central planning.
Yeah.
Of course, it doesn't mean that central planners have to be in charge and necessarily are in charge, but we clearly have some people that love central planning. Yeah. It was very popular in the Soviet Union. That was the central planning system, but it's a disaster. It failed. So that's why it's sad to see that so many people, for example, in Europe, seem to love central planning and want to, quite desperate to introduce central planning and giving more and more power to central planners, when really a decentralized system and structure is much more resilient. And because with central planning, you give so much power to a small group of people, even if they're very, very good people, just human error alone would have much more disastrous consequences in a central planning system. But then also if you have the wrong people being the central planners, not necessarily thinking of the greater good, then of course you will get a lot of disasters for the majority. And that's the trouble. So we have to be very much aware of this reality.
We will. The story is it's very revealing. I would say I learned a lot. When is the moment they really like to introduce it as a reality?
Yes,
because it's ready, right?
It is ready.
Yeah.
And so the sequence has been that first they worked on the technology. They had what they wanted. It was completely made ready already quite a few years ago.
Okay.
Then the question became, how can we introduce it? And the usual game plan would have been to do what central banks in many countries have been working on for many decades, which is to create boom-bust cycles and economic crises. And then in the crisis, you say, here's a new idea. That's the solution to the crisis. That's how they've been operating. But in this case, it seems they concluded that resistance will still be too high. People don't really want to accept this implant because it could also have consequences. And apparently we learned from the World Economic Forum that there is also an approach in law that once you have that what they call transhumanism, once you have electronic implants in the body, which is, to persuade people to do that, they always say this will enhance your functions, you get more abilities, like almost become superhuman. Yeah. But at the same time, the legal consequence may be that you're not classified as human anymore. There's this movement out there talking about humanoid robots. Yeah. And many years ago, I thought, to create a humanoid robot, that's a lot of work in electronics in order to create this humanoid robot, because when you're starting with electronics, there's a lot to build. But it's much faster if you start with a human.
Yeah.
You see?
Yeah.
So once you have certain implants, you may then be classified as a humanoid robot, which seems to be what these transhumanist people...
You can use them and throw them away whenever you like.
That becomes the next question. So once you're not classified as human anymore, but as humanoid robot, will you have human rights? And they've done, World Economic Forum has done surveys asking people,
Yeah.
do you think humanoid robots should have human rights? And most people say, no. Well, that could be you, once you've accepted the microchip implant.
Yeah,
Hopefully
signed,
not.
They
but-
signed their death sentence, actually, so, yeah, almost. Yeah.
So then the question was how to introduce this. And because clearly there is going to be resistance, they thought, okay, maybe just the simple way of creating an economic crisis is not going to be enough. So we need some other measure, and that's where they work on, gain of function virus research and bioweapons comes in, which of course, officially forbidden, but we know that particularly America has been against the international treaties working on that in many, many laboratories, also in the Ukraine. And
so actually, to do this whole plan, to make it happening, the medical element is crucial.
Well, I mean, it's not my plan, and so it seems they have concluded
the medical
that the
world
medical
has to step
part.
in.
Apparently, they decided they wanted to use the medical health dimension in order to introduce digital IDs.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because I suppose they felt that if you scare people enough, so instead of using the crisis sort of stress, use a different form of stress, which is just being scared for your life.
Yeah.
If people are scared enough for their life by just creating this,
they will do anything.
Imaginary, lethal threat, then and here's the solution, with this digital health pass, which is a form of digital ID, you will be safe and we can make society safe.
Yeah.
They figured, okay, that's where resistance is least, and that's how we can introduce it. And then it's just a small step from the digital ID, which again will be initially, is as we know already, our QR codes on the phone. But from there, we can move further to get some implant under your skin that will then serve as that ID. But why not also have some extra functions? You can have X, Y, Z and digitally enhanced things. Yeah. So that seems to be where certainly the World Economic Forum has been pushing, and it's published on their website. You can look up all that, this transhumanist agenda and digital implant agenda, and microchips are just one example of the type of stuff they want to implant.
Yeah, yeah. Meanwhile, that's the reason why they are doing it all. Yeah.